What's going on, everybody? Nick from the Sound Coop here, and today I want to show off my favorite Stratocaster mod, but with some P90s instead of a Strat setup. This is kind of a follow-up to a video that I made a couple months back showing off my favorite Strat mod in a Stratocaster. One of the questions that I got in a lot of the comments was, how does that mod sound with P90s or humbuckers? So I want to try to answer that today. Another thing that people mentioned was they were also curious how the mod would sound with a more overdriven setup. The setup that I'd used in that other video was mainly clean tones with a Strat. So I'm not only going to explore the same mod with P90s, but I'm also going to explore the mod with some more overdriven tones. And in a couple weeks, I'll release another video showing off some more overdriven tones using that same Strat setup so guys can kind of see how that sounds. But today we're going to get into this mod with some P90s. The mod that I'm showing off today is the MTG from Andy Rothstein. If you don't know Andy, he's an old school legend in the guitar community. He's probably one of the first guys, like back in the late 90s, early 2000s, who was selling wired assemblies on the internet. He's got a lot of cool mods for guitar and for bass. I'm going to put a link to his website down below. It's guitar-mod.com. If you don't know about Andy, check Andy out. I recently did a video showing off one of Andy's mods, and the mod that I was showing off in that video was the RG500D, which was in my Stratocaster. And that's an awesome mod. The mod that I'm showing off today is somewhat similar, but it has a couple of crucial differences. First off, this mod exists inside of a push-pull pot, where the RG500D is not a push-pull, it's just a regular old tone pot. The reason for this push-pull is it's set up for a guitar that only has a volume and a tone, whereas something like a Stratocaster has a volume and has two tone controls. That makes the RG500D optimal for like a Stratocaster style setup, but probably less than optimal for a setup like this. So what Andy does with this MTG mod is he builds in a high-end roll-off when the mod is in the down position, and he builds in a mid-scoop when the mod is in the up position. Now, just like the 500D, the mid-scoop is settled around 850 hertz, which is a great frequency for guitars. The big difference with the 500D is the 500D has a scoop and a boost at 850 hertz. This MTG only has the scoop. And I don't really think that's a downside for this mod. I think this mod in this guitar really benefits from the scoop, and I don't think it would benefit quite as much from the boost just because of the nature of these pickups. This one allows you to adjust the mids from 10 all the way down to 0, whereas the RG500D would allow you to adjust the mids from 5 all the way down to 0. So you have a lot more control, a lot more fine control with this compared to the RG500D. So I don't think it's a major loss, it's just different. And I think the difference makes for a better fit in a guitar like this, where you have one volume and one tone, and especially if you're going to be using a darker, more forward, more upfront pickup like a P90 compared to something like a Strat. I think let's show off a couple of the tones here real quick and let's see what we get. Also, guys, if you're liking the video, shoot me a like and subscribe. It really helps me out a lot. I greatly appreciate it. So really quick, let's just get into the functionality of this mod, and then I'll show off some clean tones and some dirty tones. Again, we got a push-pull pot here. It's in the down position right now, and it's all the way up at 10. So this is basically unaffected. This is just the neck pickup. Pretty typical P90 sound. If we turn the tone pot all the way down to 0, that's our normal, all highs rolled off, kind of underwatery sort of sound. So let's turn it back up to 10. Let's pop it up. It's in the up position now. When it's at 10 in the up position, it's still not doing anything. That's just our normal P90 sound. Let's turn the thing all the way down to 0. Big difference there. Right? It took a lot of the mids and high mids out of there. It took a lot of the aggressiveness out of the sound. So we're back up at 10 here. Let's try this again at 10. Let's try it at about 5. Big difference. Let's try it again at 0. Again, big difference. This thing has a massive effect on the tone, and you can do a lot with it. I should also point out that much like the mod that I showed off in my Strat, a cool thing about this is this will mellow out the tone without having a drastic effect on the output of the guitar. I know a lot of guys will instantly say like, oh, if I want to mellow out my P90, I'll just turn the volume knob down. Totally correct. You can absolutely do that. The problem is if you turn your volume knob down, you're not hitting the front end of your amp the same. And that might not be a problem. You can take yourself from dirty amp into really clean amp just by using the volume knob. What this will do is it will mellow out the tone of the P90 without sacrificing all of the volume. And you'll see that when we come to more of an overdriven setup. You'll notice that even when I turn this tone knob down and I scoop out all the mids, it's still driving the front end of the amp. And that's because the lows and the highs are still hitting the amp. They're leaving the guitar at the same volume. They're hitting the front end of the amp at the same loudness. Whereas if you're turning the volume knob down, you're no longer hitting the front end of the amp with the same loudness. So this allows you to mellow out sort of the frequencies that are being pushed into the front end of the amp without having a drastic effect on the actual output. So what can someone do with this? Well, I think first thing to note is a P90 can be a very strident pickup. It can be very upfront. I think that's the reason why a lot of us like it, is it has a really cool output and it has a very upfront character. You can use this sort of mid scoop to kind of mellow out a P90. And there's a lot of reasons why this is a good thing, and I'll get into those later. But I think as far as tones, what you can do is you can take a P90 pickup and you can sort of put it into Filtertron territory, and you can also put it into Lipstick Telecaster pickup territory, which to me kind of feels like a Strat with some really smoothed out highs. So let me show some of those tones off real quick with a clean setup, and then after we get done with that, I'll flip over to a more dirty amp and we'll see how that sounds using this exact same mod. Alright, so let's check out some clean tones. I have the pot in the upward position, which is the mid tone control, and I have it all the way open, so this is basically no effect. Now let's put this thing all the way down to 0 and let's try that again. Lost a lot of mid-range there, but it really makes for a lot of fun sounds. You can do a lot of strummy stuff. And it sounds almost like an acoustic. But let's put this thing somewhere in the middle. So we're back at 10 there. Let's put it at about 5. Just mellows it out just a little bit. To me, that sounds a lot like a Filtertron. It just has like a more mellow top and a less aggressive upper mid. I really like that. If you turn it down a little bit more to like maybe about 3, we can kind of get into like more Hendrixy stuff. So that was about 3. Let's do that at 10. Definitely a lot more aggressive, a lot more upfront, a lot more in your face. I think a lot of us like P90s for that reason, but here are a couple of things that you can do with this mid scoop that I think make it a lot of fun. If you do a lot of stuff on looper pedals, you can create a rhythm part with sort of half of the mid sucked out. And then you can play your lead parts with that thing put back at 10 with all of that high end back. And what it'll kind of do is it'll scoop out a space in the mid-range frequencies for your lead guitar parts to fit in. A lot of fun. If you're a studio guy, you can use half the mid scooped out for your rhythm parts. And then if you want to do a lead, you can pop right back up to 10 and then have all that upfront mid back in your face. That's another really fun thing you can do with it. Another thing I love doing with it is if I'm recording a track and we have sort of a melody part that the guitar is doing, like a line or something, like, you know, something like this. I used this in a recent recording. Like a line like that, if you record the main line with the pot all the way open, what you can then do is you can put the pot at about halfway, and you can create left and right doubles of the same line playing the same part, and it'll sound a lot different. So you'll still have your main line very up front and in your face, and you'll have those supporting lines that you pan left to right, sort of just adding more emphasis, more body, more fullness, but not distracting from the character of the main track. Really very fun, very useful, a good way to keep guitar tracks from stepping on one another while still getting that multi-track vibe. And you can do it incrementally too. Like you can record your main line with the pot all the way open. You can record 2 doubled lines at 7, record 2 more double lines at 5, record 2 more double lines at 3, and then 2 more double lines at 0, and just create like a pad out of all those. And it's wonderful. It works really well. This is great for both in the studio and for live use. So a couple quick clean tones. I think let's flip this thing over to like a more Marshall, a more driven setup, and let's see how that sounds. All right, so we're going into a Marshall amp and cab now. This is definitely a little more of a driven setup. Very in your face, very aggressive, sounds killer. But let's put that pot at like about 5. Yeah, mellowed it out a little bit. You're not losing all the bite, and more importantly, you're not losing all the distortion. Here's a great thing about this mod. I think a lot of guys who are watching this who mess around with P90s a lot will point out, well, if you want to mellow out your P90, you can just use the volume knob. And it's totally true. But when you start using your volume knob, you start taking your amp out of its overdrive character. You start reducing the output from the guitar, which means you're hitting the front end of your amp not quite as hard, which means you're not pushing the amp as hard. And that's totally fine. That's totally a vibe. What using your volume knob will do is it'll get you from an overdriven amp setup into a cleaner amp setup, which is totally a viable thing. When you start adjusting this tone pot, you can mellow out the guitar without adjusting how hard you're hitting the front of the amp. So you can make the tone a little less aggressive, a little more rhythmic, I guess, and you're not losing all of that distortion. If we go to 10, there's a decent amount of overdrive there. If we go to like 3 or 4, there's still plenty of overdrive there. It's just you're not hearing all those aggressive frequencies. You're not getting all that stuff from like 900 hertz to 2K that's really in your face. It kind of chills all that out. So again, all the way open. Right at about 5. Not a major difference there, just a little bit more mellow. That's about 3. Definitely a lot more mellow. And if we take this thing all the way down to 0, now one thing I think is really cool about going down to 0 is if you use it with the humbucker position, you can get a lot of those kind of AC/DC Malcolm tones. I noticed that like a lot of Malcolm's parts seem to have a scooped mid, and I don't know if that's coming from the guitar or if that's happening at the amp or if they're doing that in post, but it seems like they're making room for Angus kind of in the middle of Malcolm. I don't have a humbucker here, but what I have is I have a series position up in the 4th spot, which basically turns these 2 pickups into a humbucker. So not exactly like a humbucker, but it'll give you the output of a humbucker, and it'll also give you the sort of high-end roll-off that you get from using a humbucker compared to using a single coil. So let's just hear the humbuckers all the way open. Definitely a lot more aggressive than the P90, a little bit darker. If we put that thing down at 0, it reminds me of Malcolm a little bit. Let me turn it up just a little bit. Let's put it at like maybe 3. It's got a little bit of an AC/DC vibe. I really really love that, where if you have it cranked up, it's really aggressive, real ear piercing, really in your face. If you turn that thing down just a little bit, you lose a lot of those aggressive frequencies, but you're still kind of maintaining those sort of string reiki frequencies, which is really nice. You kind of still get the upper end percussion without losing all the output and without losing all of the meat. And same kind of a thing with the clean setup. If you're tracking heavily distorted parts and you're doing a lot of doubles, this thing is really helpful, where you can have like 1 or 2 doubles that are done all the way wide. And then you can do a couple doubles with it mellowed out. It's really a pretty fun mod. Another set of guys that might like this is guys that play like more mellow rootsy music. Like if you do jazz or you do country, this might be a really helpful thing for guys that play a lot of P90 style guitars. It'll really give you a lot in one guitar. And when I have a guitar I really like this Novo, I want to have a lot of options. I don't want to have to take 5 guitars to a session. I don't want to have to run back and forth around my house getting different guitars and bringing them into the studio to lay down parts. I'd rather just grab a guitar that I think is going to work well and then have a ton of options on board without having to do a bunch of modifications. So same thing as the other mod. This doesn't require a 9-volt, and even though it doesn't have the boost that the mod that I showed off in the Stratocaster has, I think this mid-range scoop works very well for a P90 style setup. I don't think it's quite as effective for a humbucker setup just because there's not as much high end there. P90 has a nice amount of high end, so when you scoop the mids out, you still got a lot of that high end there. With the humbucker, depending on the pickup, you can lose a lot of that high end, so it makes the mid scoop with the humbucker sound a little more muffly. Again, pickup dependent. I don't know, at the end of the day, this is one of my favorite mods. I put this in a lot of my guitars because I find it extremely useful. It's great in the Strat for getting a lot of those Mark Knopfler tones and those Jimi Hendrix, John Mayer kind of tones. What it does for P90s, it's a completely different utility. And I love that about this mod. So I'm going to put links to this mod down in the description. Andy kind of has them all listed on one page. The one that you're looking for if you want this exact mod is the MTG, the mid-tone for guitar. And again, give me a couple weeks, I'll put out a video with my Stratocaster showing off the RG500D mod with a dirtier setup. The last video I made, it was strictly clean tones. And I think a lot of people wanted to hear it with sort of tube screamer tones and some more overdriven setups. So give me a couple weeks, I'll put that out. Meanwhile, I appreciate you guys. If you like the video, shoot me a like and subscribe. It helps out a lot. Everyone take care. I'll see you again soon.